What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity. And today on the podcast, we kick off a little experiment. That's right, this is the beginning of the very first series we're calling Process This Artificial Intelligence. Just recently, we moved the Homebrewed newsletter and its major content sharing moments over to Substack. And the newsletter is called Process This. So if you're not on it, come on over, right? You can join 74,000 other people in hanging out with us over there on Substack. Why? Because Substack, unlike a lot of social media, the ecosystem just nice. There's not as many crazy, angry comments. It's really easy to interact and all that kind of stuff. And I know a bunch of you have wanted to be a part of the Homebrewed community and stuff in the past. And we built essentially something like Patreon before Patreon existed. And, it's just very expensive to maintain it and keep updating it and such. So we're transitioning over to Substack and theologyclass.com, which if you are a member at theologyclass.com and get access to all 45 of our current classes, and we add all of them as we go along, you'll also get a membership at Substack. So yeah, there you go. But the cool thing about this Substack and the Process This kind of theory is that we'll be doing a series of interviews with people across different disciplines all around the same topic. And I'll also, this time, my buddy Kester Brewin, who y'all probably met a few weeks ago on the podcast when I interviewed him about his new book, Godlike, which is about AI. He's going to join me in this episode as we introduce the concept. Like, what is AI? What are the big questions that come up? Technological ones, ethical ones, spiritual ones, political ones, religious ones. How's it impacting community and all that kind of stuff. We kind of lay that out here. And then we've arranged interviews with scholars across different disciplines. Yes, philosophers, theologians, and such, like Caputo is back, Ilia Dilio, that kind of thing. Some real pioneers in AI in both the science and research side, along with even lawmakers that are leaders in trying to pioneer what does regulation look like? How are we going to use it? How is it upsetting and interacting with the economy? How can it not get turned into another advancement in efficiency to undo even more well-being for the workers? So there's all that's going on. So we'll do this series, and then at the end, we'll pick back up these questions introduced here. And in the meantime, we'll be interacting on the Process This Substack with all the readers. All of you can send in questions, discussing the little thread thing. It's a really cool platform, by the way. It reminds me of when blogging was cool and linking to each other mattered, and you could actually read blogs, and then you left comments that were substantive, and it's wild. It's wild. So yeah, come on over. The water's fine. Anyway, this is the intro for it. I hope you dig it. If you want to hang out in person, you can come to Theology Beer Camp this October 17th and 19th in Denver, Colorado. It's going to be so much fun. theologybeer.camp. If you want to get access to all the old homebrewed classes, as well as the growing collection that we're building, go to theologyclass.com. And if you want to interact online, get ad-free episodes, extended episodes on occasion, and lots of little private podcast goodies, then head over to the Substack, Process This, join up, and then we'll be connected. It's great. All right. Thank you all for listening. Extremely, extremely big buckets of gratitude for all you who have supported the podcast over these years, and I'm looking forward to using Substack for better, more personal interaction and exploring topics like this. All right. Peace, friends.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and I'm here with Kester Brewin, and we're getting to kick off a fun experiment on the internet where we weave together podcasts, live streams, newsletters, Kester's book, which I got right here for all ye that have not manage to get yourself a copy. Godlike. And though this is the not for resale version, so I don't,
That's a special one, Trip.
Today, our goal is really to introduce a series because we're going to get to have a series of conversations. Either Kester or I will be talking with a host of scholars from different disciplines. So we kind of want to set it up. Y'all have already sent in 40 some questions that are, or what kind of questions do you bring into it? So we'll be bringing some of those in. But I thought first, Kester, I would love for you to take a minute to introduce yourself. Where the question of AI and our relationship to technology, like when did that come on your interest intellectually and seize you enough that you end up writing a book and get lured into this experiment? My first time weaving podcast and Substack all together. Like what had to happen for you to say yes to this?
I'm already winning, and like the tech has made us do new things. So this is great. Interestingly, so I wrote a book called Getting High a few years ago, which was my kind of take on why it is that the Apollo space missions and the LSD counterculture kind of happened at the same place, kind of around the same time, with some of the same characters. And it was really about our long history of technology as a mechanism for kind of lifting ourselves away from the fall. So there were kind of two ways there of getting high within that. And there's an interesting piece in the book where I was like, I can see where this is going. Like in the kind of fallout from after Apollo, and of course we're only just getting back to go to the moon now, and similarly in the kind of fallout from the LSD counterculture, those two things literally came together with the same personnel with this crazy invention of the internet. And the story is a really fascinating one. It's a kind of weirdly theological one in the sense that the first ever message sent over the kind of proto-internet was low, as if like there was some angelic being like calling us. It was actually like the thing had crashed after two characters. It was meant to be log in, but it just said low. So I think there was a beautiful angelic thing there. Anyway, so I wrote the book and there was a kind of thing there about, some AI stuff in there. But then literally a year ago, April 2023, the head of the UK government's kind of head of AI safety, a guy called Ian Hogarth, who's like been a serial investor in AI startups and stuff. He wrote a piece for the Financial Times, big UK newspaper, I'm sure it's in the US too, where he said, we need to pause the race towards godlike AI. I was like, wait a minute. There is something very, very rich going on in this conversation. Now, I'd spent 25 years in education teaching math. So I kind of moved from education to becoming head of communications at the Institute for the Future of Work, which is a small research charity. And we focus on how we're doing AI and automation, and how that's impacting the labor market. So it's kind of like, this is kind of my day job now as well. So the two things came together for me to write the book. Which I've been really, really thrilled about the response, and it's been covered in the press over here and stuff. And it seems to have tapped into a bit of a seam of interest, not just around AI as the technology, but how it's changing us as people too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So today, I think what would be fun is, one, I want to kind of like try to get an idea of what kind of definition, a working definition for thinking about AI. And then we have 5 quick questions for you to answer in 90 seconds or less, which would be something. And then looking at all the different people we're going to get to talk to and the different disciplines and questions they work with, I thought it would be nice to kind of think about how AI impacts like humans and our relationship with technology. What kind of ethical questions show up? How does it reshape religion and spirituality? And how do we think about AI and the human future and kind of an evolutionary framework? Because there are different scholars joining that's what they wrestle with. And so I think like hearing us kind of work out the constellation of questions will be helpful so that people that are participating as we go along can start thinking like, oh, they're going to talk to so-and-so. Maybe you could raise this, or I've read this and such. But first, like what kind of working definition do you have for AI when it's like all of a sudden found itself on the mouths of lots of people, and half the time people don't know when they're using it, how it's being used, but they know it's a thing that we're supposed to have thoughts about. but it's like simultaneously mysterious and powerful.
I mean, as I say at the beginning of the book, to use the title of the recent film, it's everything, everywhere, all at once, and it's also completely nothing. Like it's really not a particularly useful phrase in any kind of sense, and I don't think we'd ever get to a reasonably good working definition if we tried. It is simultaneously going to be this savior to help us solve the problems of climate change, but at the same time, the data centers it requires are so kind of carbon heavy that it's going to make climate change even worse. It's going to take all our jobs from us, but it's going to save us from our labor. It's going to do all of these things. And it's even at the recent, technology entertainment show in the States, you could buy an AI pillow. I mean, who knows what was going on in the AI pillow. So it is, as I say in the book, it's both our nightmare and our dreamlike sleep. So it is kind of meaningless, but it is also extremely meaningful. Like when you are using Spotify, you are using an algorithmic technology that's suggesting stuff to you. It's reading data and it's making suggestions. Whenever you write a socials post, it's kind of got those generative AI stuff embedded within it. So these one aspect of AI that people tend to kind of use as a kind of proxy is generative AI, like Chat GPT. Getting the P and the T the right way around. And that is a technology that's using kind of like predictive text on steroids. I mean, literally all it does is look back through a string of words and go, that's interesting. With that string of words, what would be the most likely next word? And it literally does that, on steroids. But then there are also the kind of systems that are more hidden. And that might be if you are a delivery driver or a taxi driver or an Uber driver or something, or you're working in a warehouse and your day is kind of controlled by an algorithm. Like it tells you where to go. It might even be telling you if you get work at all. It might be telling you what you're going to get paid for that shift. And these kind of management decisions that it's taking are much, much more kind of below the surface, but are much, much more powerfully impacting people's lives kind of day to day. So, in one sense, AI is a bit like a Rorschach test. It can tell you something, or like a character test, that's the kind of AI optimist, which is like, it's all going to be fine. And then there's the AI pessimist, which is like, it's all going to be terrible. The AI dismissive, it's like, nah, it's just another PC. And then the AI utopian, which is like, oh my God, we're all just going to be sitting in kind of, full luxury communism, doing nothing at all. So the point is, all of these are possible. Because AI is a human creation and everything is currently in play. And we have got to decide which of these futures we want, rather than to kind of sit back and abdicate it to big tech. So, the point of the book is we have got to be more active, reflective users of technology and start making proper decisions at personal, communal, political levels about what that future is going to be.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that happened to me when I got your book early and I read it and I loved it, which is why I was thrilled we got to talk about the book in depth, which if you haven't seen that, it's on the internet and it's connected on the Substack and stuff as well. But that made me go back because I had to teach one session on AI in the religion and science class from the biology and psychological sciences at the University of Edinburgh. But I had a guest lecturer for it. Because I'm like, I don't know. And when you're at a big university like that, it's easy to go like, do I want to read 3 colleagues, attempt to summarize it, or phone a friend? And I did, right? So I went back to that and was just chasing down footnotes. So in the last 2 months, I've read more about AI and used university logins to go to lecture series to watch it double speed and such. Just so I try to keep up and not embarrass myself when we talk about this. And so I blame you for the interest and or the nightmares that have come.
I'll take that blame gladly.
And there are two things about kind of capturing it. I wonder if you think these are helpful or if this is just trip. But Anna Forrest, who is early generation pioneer in AI, who y'all all get to meet in this series. I saw her give a lecture online as part of I think it was an Oxford colloquium in science and technology. And she said that the definition of AI is really difficult to pin down just because of all that's grouped in it. But underneath it, why it generates the kinds of questions that humans have now is that it's an attempt to let computers do something for which we intuitively believe human intelligence is necessary. And it's that like gap of this isn't what computers do, but now computers are doing it. How's that going on? And the research problems or research projects that come out of it are ones that are utilizing the kind of algorithmic power of a computer to do things we would put in our category of distinctly human kind of intelligence, or at least the kind of intelligence that emerges with us and our biological kin who have survival instincts, senses to engage the world, and then we're piecing things on, passing things on, and this is algorithms and zeros and ones and such trying to do it. And I think that to me was kind of helpful, and it enables to draw a kind of a distinction in two different kinds of AI. The ones that are big data, right, that you were mentioning, like where like large language learning models, ChatGPT, that kind of stuff, where it's accessed digitally to so much data. It's a patterns of retrieval and organization. And then there's the kinds of AI where they're embodied in some way, right? A robot, it involves social intelligence of some sort, which Anna's early work at MIT was like the first two big interactive robots that now, generally technology takes off the moment it can connect to war and sex. So if you want to know what those two, what the kind of social robots are doing, it usually involves killing people or satisfying people.
Yes.
But those kind of are like, yes, they're all AI in the sense that computers are doing something that we tend to think this is part of like our intelligence.
Yeah.
But they kind of raise different questions collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the point I make in the book, kind of going back in the history in that sense, we managed to get hold of intelligence by stealing fire from the gods. There's this kind of, great Promethean moment of stealing fire as a proxy for language and our ability to have discretion and intelligence. And what the big tech companies have done is basically commit an enormous act of theft. I mean, they will be open about it. They call them open AI because they're super open about the fact they've just stolen stuff, and they have trawled through the vast amounts of text that we have generated on Wikipedia, on Reddit, on YouTube transcriptions and stuff. And they have basically given language to machines, but that language was our language, that language was us. So that's why it can have a proxy of intelligence, because it's just probabilistically looking at an enormous data set. So in a sense, the technology is super, super simple. You just need fast enough processors and big enough data sets to be able to kind of look back and do that predictive stuff. The robotics are, again, it's a kind of a sensing problem and then a response problem. And again, it's got to be sophisticated enough to make that work. I mean, the original Loebner Prize, which if you've not read Brian Christian's book, The Most Human Human, is a wonderful, wonderful book where this was about a competition to try and pass the Turing test. And this was, the kind of basic Turing test set by Alan Turing. He was asked, well, could a machine ever be intelligent? Was like, well, if it can fool you that it is intelligent, then you might as well say it is intelligent. Like if you can't tell the difference. So the kind of basic level of that was you sit behind a curtain and you're interacting on a screen with a keyboard via text with some chatbot or some other human. And you've got to then, as a human squad of people, like decide, am I interacting with a computer or with a human? So there's a really interesting problem there for the computer programmers. There is also that subsequent problem for the control group of humans behind the curtain who have got to say, like, what would you say to try and convince someone behind a curtain that you are a human and not a computer? And one of the people that Brian Christian talks about is a professor of Shakespearean literature. And she was so knowledgeable about Shakespeare, nobody believed she was a human. Everyone thought that she must be a robot.
She needed to dumb it down.
She needed to dumb it down. And then one year someone goes for like the kind of irony, like, oh, I am imitating a computer. And the year after, the computer that won was one that pretended to be a human pretending to be a computer. So the way that robots and us interact with one another is much more fluid. And we, of course, know, really that it's been that thing of like, are robots becoming more human or are humans becoming more robotic? And that's the fundamental question about where that gray area exists. And AI is really pushing the envelope extremely fast on that point to the point that we kind of urgently now need regulation around this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of those places where it's important to remember that part of the cognitive mechanisms all of us share is the incentive to anthropomorphize.
Yes.
And I'm sure the radical theologians get excited once you make that point, because not only do we manage to project mind onto all sorts of things, whether they have one, like in my experience, we've met in person, Kester, you're real. I'm fully convinced of your inner subjective life and think it deserves dignity. But throughout Scripture, the prophets regularly point out that this activity of anthropomorphizing an object without interiority is called idolatry.
Yeah.
Right. And so like even the framing of the Turing test and then the way these things play out help us actually raise a question like what is what's going on about what's happening with the technology, or is the technology learning how to use a psychological technology that we've evolved for, selected for? And there's a long history of it, which I'm sure we'll all get to discuss when Robert Wright joins the series, Non-Zero Newsletter, who wrote The Moral Animal, early evolutionary psych book, The Evolution of God, which looks at the function of the concept of God as it moves through human species. And I think that there's like there are all these little play areas of sorts where these normal places that we might get in a nice little theological argument about idolatry and the concept of God and what it refers to, what gets itself done in it. But then AI is like forcing everyone to have those conversations.
Exactly.
And I actually think it's, I've been making a list. We aren't going to go through them today. That's for the end of the experiment. But there are all these places that religious traditions and schools of philosophy have raised questions about what it means to be human and have long arguments that oftentimes when I introduce them in a philosophy of religion class, they roll their eyes and are like, who the hell worries about this? Yeah. But now they're all showing back up again. Yeah. And I think that AI element dials it up.
Yeah. And this is why it's profoundly important that AI, in this space, that we don't lose our theological language or that we don't just kind of abdicate it to those with specific religious beliefs, because we need more than ever the kind of history of that language of theology and you could say philosophy and other things as well, to help us deal with speaking about things that are so vast that impact us in such enormous ways that we really, we need that level of language to be able to talk about it. That's what I've always said, and I was just so chuffed that you picked up on it, that the new book, Godlike, is a very, very centrally radical theological text. It is in some ways just a book about technology, but really its central place is in radical theology, which is how can we apply what we've been discussing around radical theology, around, deconstructing belief, to these incredibly important areas of economics, of technical stuff, of the ways that kind of technology is impacting culture and is impacting the ways in which we respond to one another and change our beliefs and our understanding of who we are.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kester, you're getting very close to one of our 5 questions. So here we go. These are 5 questions that Kester said he thinks he can give a alluring answer to in 90 seconds or less, which I will say, I fail at this task all the time. I have a hard time asking a question in under 90 seconds, let alone answering one. So this
is each question in 90 seconds.
Yeah, you only get 90 seconds per question. Okay. And I'm only going to read the question, Kester. I'm just getting my extra vamping in, setting up for the asking of just a 1-sentence question. But all right, are you ready? Are you ready? And I'm not going to time it. I'm not going to hit the air horn unless it seems like it'd be fun.
Let's do that. Yeah.
All right. But I will use a sound effect to intro.
Oh,
Kester doing 5 quick questions.
Oh, yeah. Intelligence might be artificial, but these answers from Kester are not.
Yeah. All right. Question number 1. Hey, Kester, I thought AI was just more tech. Why is it a theological issue?
Because the title of the book is Godlike. And as I said, this came from the UK's own kind of lead on AI safety, who wrote an article saying, that AI is godlike. And as I explained in the book, it's a theological issue because it's got such vast and wide ranging impacts. It's what Jack Lacan calls like the big other. It's where there are systems of power that are so vast, they kind of distort the gravities of our human behavior. And that's why we've got to be able to talk about those power structures. And that's why we need the theological thinking in order to do it. All technologies are theological because they have that sense of impacting on power structures.
Ooh, well done. That's really high expectations because it's question 2. Question 2. Your book is a 500-year history of AI. How so old?
Well, as I say in the book, that AI is a technology that's only just caught up with the human desires behind it, which are very, very ancient. And the reason I start 500 years ago is because a wonderful monk called Giordano Bruno was put to death in Rome, burnt at the stake for claiming to have invented a technology that would allow him to know all things and become godlike. And that technology about, being able to know all things and therefore become like God. Actually, we see that going back all the way through history. You can go back to the Garden of Eden and, eating from the tree of knowledge, and you won't die. You'll become like God because you'll know all things. And then we go forward to like in the film Oppenheimer. And just after that, there's these kind of theoretical technologies of knowing all things. And again, that's going to bring about world peace because we've just had this terrible weapon of war. So right the way through history, from Frankenstein through to Faust, all of these things, it's that same thing. Can we build a technology that would allow us to know all things and thus become godlike? And that's why, it's got that whole sweep of history through those many centuries and millennia.
Ooh. All right.
Might have been
all right. Well, the real question is, next time we do this, see how much longer my answers are if you ask me to attempt to give 90-second answers. All right. Number 3. Yes, sir. I've heard you say technology and theology are always bound together. What's up with that?
Well, you can nail 95 theses to the door of a church, but the printing press is what actually brings about the Reformation. So all theological ideas come into being in a technological sphere, and they actually react with one another. You look at the other kind of classic industrial revolution, the invention of the steam engine and the kind of factory processes. You don't get that working unless you have a theology that kind of pushes people into a state where they see that their labor is somehow sanctifying and is going to save them up to some paradisic state where they don't need to work anymore. Similarly, you can build technologies of plantations and stuff, but you can't get an industrial complex of slavery without a theology that sees Black Africans as somehow less than human. So in each sense, like the technologies that we have and the theologies we use to justify them kind of interplay with one another. And that's why, when we see things like the Reformation and the Industrial Revolution, they are more than just historical events. They're interplaying with one another, and they are always bringing those kind of socio-cultural effects and impacts on one another. It's about the belief structures within which technologies emerge, and those then affect the belief structures as well, and also the ways that we understand one another and our ontology and our resistance to them.
Yeah. All right. Now, I just want you to know how the temptation of excursions on each of these answers is. It's very.
You're not into temptation, okay?
Yeah. Number 4, Kester, isn't AI like social media on steroids? Like, should we really care? Should we really spend 2 months talking about this?
We really should. We're only just starting to see the absolutely horrendous mess that social media has got us into. It is changing our brains. It's changing our politics. It's changed our relationships, our work. It's changed how we spend our time. Sorry, I just need to quickly. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was on a podcast. I was just going to scroll through my phone for a while. It changes how we relate to one another. And this is before we've had AI generated content that is going to lay the focus through the algorithm to completely press your buttons exactly. That is going to be super, super problematic. The real problem with the kind of deep fake content that we see that generative AI can produce is not that people will believe it. It's that they will then believe nothing, because anything could just be generated by AI. So it's this abdication of our polity, of our working together to kind of shape a better future for everyone. That leaves a chasm, if we evacuate that, that's filled by those who'll just kind of turn a profit and serve themselves. So actually, yes, it is connected to social media and its impacts, but it is exponentially and existentially important. Yeah.
All right. Question number 5, the finale. Is AI going to deliver us from toil? If so, shouldn't we welcome our robot overlords?
Please come and relieve us of our toil. Yeah. And actually, that's always been the promise of every technology. You go back to the 12th century, as I quote in the book, Hugh St. Victor, who said, the mechanical arts are subsumed under the task of restoring our pre-fall nature. In other words, we get to work to earn our salvation, to elevate ourselves through the use of better technologies. And as someone has put in the chat, that is the Tower of Babel. People gathering together to use new technologies and bricks to build this big tower in order that they might reach heaven. And God looks down, or this construct of God looks down and says, this is not a good thing. Let's confuse their language as a way of confusing their ability to work together. So, the promise is a complex religious one that technology gives us. It's wrapped up in systems of power and struggle. So while that promise is that, we search Google and we can find out all things, actually, Google is free because it's searching us and it's extracting value for others, for advertisers. So I've got really, really grave doubts about the promise that it's going to relieve us from our toil. It's going to relieve some people of their toil, but actually there's going to be many hidden impacts. And that's why I'm kind of so thrilled to be almost at the point of being able to release a fantastic name from the Global South who's going to help us talk about the wonderful problem of the digital sweatshops and all that kind of stuff, because that's a very, very real issue. Brilliant story. I'm going over 90 seconds and I can't anymore, but brilliant story of the Amazon kind of supermarkets where you didn't have to scan anything and you just kind of put stuff in your basket and walked out of the shop and it got, automatically credited, or you had to pay using your Amazon account. Oh, guess what? There were thousands of workers in India sitting there looking at the cameras, adding the stuff and putting it in manually. It's just that all the staff in our nice glossy shops over in the West were removed from us, but the labor has been taken elsewhere. So that's massively, massively important that we understand that there's a lot of tech, if we relieve ourselves of our toil, someone else has done that work for us. Somebody has been through and looked all those horrendous images of violence and abuse that are, out there on the internet and tagged them and being paid like $2 an hour somewhere in Kenya in order to make AI safer for us. That is a very, very serious issue that we will be taking seriously in this podcast, and we should all take very, very seriously together. So, it might deliver some people from their labor, but it's going to be very, very bad for many, many others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so, you're mentioning there might even be a few more people we're having a part of this. For those that haven't gone and checked out who all's going to be here. We mentioned Anna for us before, Noreen Hersfield, who is early generation AI. She was a computer scientist and then was on sabbatical and asked, it was like, I want to do more research on AI, and realized that all the questions the humanities were generating were not, there weren't resources taking place in those leading the technological field. So she goes and does a PhD. She's trying to decide in the humanities, like, am I going to do maybe like go literature and like Frankenstein and that kind of thing? Am I going to go over here and deal with philosophy? But philosophers question technology in a different way. And it was precisely that connection of AI, its promise, and being godlike, creating something in our image that made her go do a PhD in theology.
That's incredible.
So she'll be here. Brent Waters, who has been a longtime ethicist in technology and worked with a host of different companies that try to raise it, only to find out the companies are only mildly interested in technology. Robert Rye to be here. Ilya Dilio's coming back, who has done a lot of work in Catholic evolutionary philosophy and the role of technology and what are the perils and promise of AI. Michael Bunt, who's at University of Nottingham, but has facilitated a lot of the AI and religion research projects in the UK and had a number of grants on it. And we met working on a Templeton Foundation grant when I was at the University of Edinburgh, and he's been working in AI for a while. Michael Morelli, who's a scholar of Jacques Ellul, who uses that framework to think about AI, which will raise questions philosophically that the ethical example you're just giving raises, right? Like, what do we do with technology and modernity? It gets used for totalitarian means first, and it becomes a means to hide the violence at the heart of the modern project.
I mean, there was a brilliant interview that Atlantic magazine uncovered the other day, which was kind of on YouTube and it had just been sitting there. But one of the senior engineers at OpenAI, a guy called Brian Wu, was asked by someone on a great little kind of Q&A thing, like, hey, tell me about the future of work and stuff. And he's like, oh, it's kind of deeply unfair that a group of people could just build AI and take everyone's jobs away. And in some sense, there's nothing you can do about it right now. And that's like the bit that got quoted. It was like, oh, damn, that is deeply unfair and unjust. But what he then does in the video is he actually tells us what to do. And he goes, well, actually, there's nothing you can do to stop them except, you can petition for regulation. Oh, okay. You could raise awareness. You can get governments to care. You can get people to care. And it's like, okay, you've literally told us what to do. And you've literally then kind of set up our lineup, because one of the people that I'll be speaking to is Lord Tim Clement Jones, who's leading work in the House of Lords on AI regulation. Fantastic guy and has written a brilliant book all about it. We'll be speaking, hopefully, fingers crossed again, almost 99% there, to a Nobel Prize winning economist who I've met, who deals with labor markets and is going to talk about what the impacts are. And, we're going to be talking about how we can petition. We're going to be talking about what we need to be doing in the coming elections in the UK and in the US, where there's kind of all these kind of crazy side issues, but there are major existential things we need to be asking candidates about, like, what should we be doing with these incredibly important technologies? Part of that is about getting governments to care, but that's about getting people to care. When in fact, they're just kind of scrolling through their phones again and really not concentrating on the major things that are happening to their work and well-being. These are hugely important impacts, but everyone's on TikTok looking at cats.
Oh, and you're going to get to talk to Caputo.
Yes, I'm also really excited to talk to Professor John Caputo, or Jack, as he's known to some, who I'm super excited about because he has been considering writing a full-length text on AI. And I'm hoping that he'll be kind of talking about what would be in that book if he ever set about to write it. He has a chapter and another section of a work which we'll be talking about too. But I'm really excited to kind of hear his work, obviously a great scholar of deconstruction and philosophy and so on, because there's just so many wonderful areas this can go into. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, so before I wrap up, I want to kind of get some of the questions that you and I are carrying kind of into these conversations. And then hopefully as the episodes come out and all of you that are participating, hear them and things and send questions back, because we'll pick these back up at the end. And I hope, as you hear, there's a host of challenges that we're just now getting an idea of what's there. There are going to be possibilities and challenges that we don't even know yet that are going to come up. And part of kind of critical reflection on anything is getting to know it enough that you at least think the question you're asking is worth pursuing. Part of what drives the growth of apathy and cynicism in our culture around so many important things is the way in which the flood of information, like people become obsessed and addicted to data, all the way to the point that it disempowers you from ever wanting to make some claim about values in it. And so the effort both of us are putting in this and the kind of response possibilities using Substack and stuff, I hope that by the end of it, those of us that have been involved and those of y'all that take the journey, that we all have a little bit more confidence of how to think about the human future in light of this new technological shift.
Can I give one example of that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, for years and years, everyone's kind of sat there in little rooms and thought about the trolley problem. Like, would you pull the lever and would you send the truck down here to save the baby, but it's going to kill 20,000 people and everything. And like, that's kind of philosophically interesting thing. My God, like there's now a real live problem with algorithmic systems to do with driverless technology or driver assisted technologies that are being made right now. And these are reading huge amounts of data. You talk to people who care about data privacy and algorithms, and they've given up worrying about the privacy issues around these things, our phones. The major privacy issues are around your car. Like it knows how tightly you are gripping the steering wheel. It is reading how violently you're throwing that thing around the road. It knows when you've got a baby seat plugged in. It knows all of this data and where is that being shared. But then there are people out there who are coding and weighting these algorithms whereby where you're going down the street and it's like, well, if I take that little route, I'm going to knock the old lady off the bicycle, or I'm going to have to smash into the guy in the extremely expensive car. Which one of those do I do? And that ethical question is then also like, well, what's the insurance thing on this? The woman is old and the goose guy's like, these are now fully important real life problems where coders are saying, we cannot take these decisions. We need ethicists. We need theologians and philosophers to help us do this because we shouldn't be sitting here like typing away code, creating those systems for us. Super important that people realize these are humans writing code that are making real decisions that are going to have real impacts in the world using kind of philosophical problems that people have sat there talking about for so long that are now real in life.
Yeah. Yeah. And if people aren't familiar with the trolley problem, go to YouTube and look up the trolley problem on the show, The Good Place. The show's great. Like if you're semi-interested in philosophy and haven't enjoyed it, then you're missing out. But that episode in particular is just like peak joy when you're like, finally, when I use this in class, I have something to show the undergrad students. But that's actually, so that was one of the areas I think we wanted to kind of raise a few of the questions we're bringing in. That's like the ethical questions that come up with AI. One that the ethical questions to me that it even showed up just in the chat or the message feed of people on Substack kind of following along is the ecological impact of AI, both the harvesting of minerals to produce all the processing and power that's necessary in the volume of energy that's used. Just in the episode, one of the episodes I recorded earlier this week for the series, I found out that an AI search, like if you were just asking like, oh, who was that French philosopher that Caputo wrote about?
Yeah.
And it's like Derrida.
Yeah.
That uses 10 times the energy of asking the same question to Google.
Exactly.
And when you think of just how much energy is going into it, and how that access of energy is something you're unaware of, right? I had no idea till someone's telling me, and I'm like, well, who knows how many other scary things I'm going to learn in this series.
And there's a kind of reverse of the fossil fuel problem in that, there is so much kind of baked back there in terms of the need to extract in order to gain those profits. And similarly now, there is so much venture capital invested in AI that these guys need their money back. And to do that, they've got to extract data from us. And for that, there's going to be a huge energy problem in that front. So there are enormous environmental problems around that. And this is why it gets super complicated. It's like, wow, AI is going to solve the energy crisis for us. It's like, yeah, it's complicated. And all of it is ethically complicated. I was speaking to a voice artist the other day who's made her living for many years recording audiobooks and stuff, and her work has disappeared overnight. Not only has it disappeared, it has been stolen from her. There was a gig offered a couple of years ago, this kind of weird thing like, hey, could you just read this out and we'll pay you $70 for it? That was it. They stole her voice, But on the other side of that, like my mum's losing her eyesight. So the fact that audiobooks are now much cheaper gives her wider access to knowledge of a different sort. That's great. So where do the kind of ethical boundaries lie in terms of preserving people's jobs and quality and their craft and those elements of being human in terms of performance, but also helping people who are really going to benefit from some of the ways that these technologies cheapen access to information and, kind of help people out in those ways. It is not going to be simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that one of the areas you hinted at there that AI levels up ethical questions is how it gets utilized for you give it its agenda in many ways. And when AI is being leveraged by market investors that need a return, and they get that return by knowing you in ways you don't know yourself, so that you become the product, that they cultivate desires in you for things you can consume, and all that kind of stuff, it raises other ethical questions. Just like in consumption, the same thing happens the way it gets leveraged in the public square around fear. So xenophobia, anti-Semitism, these kinds of things can get leveraged because it holds attention, and that attention gets sold. And then it rallies up. It's like the technology can grab these cognitive mechanisms that enabled human beings to flourish in sub-Saharan Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago as we're trying to outcompete Neanderthals. And now they tell you a Big Mac is a great solution to hunger. Tribalism is a great solution to an identity crisis, and consumption is a great solution to fulfillment in this world. And like the moment we see how it can be leveraged in those ways, then just the passive information and data it's collecting can get turned against us.
Exactly.
It's kind of like your own self is being held hostage, and what you thought was jewelry, right, to raise your life experience has turned out to be algorithmic chains.
And this is, the kind of interesting parallel with the religion thing, really, in that you've got this kind of, let's call it a high technology or a technology in the cloud, which is promising to connect us all together in these kind of wonderful horizontal community connections that we call social media and your friends on Facebook and all this kind of stuff. And it's mediating those connections, and it's telling you, presenting to you an algorithmized timeline of those connections. And actually they're not rich connections. They're not really rich connections. What that's done is to completely abdicate and remove that central structure of where we kind of gather together in person and meet people who are slightly different and kind of have our opinion shaped, and then get to kind of shape opinion. And those mid-level structures then are good ways to speak up to the high-level structures. Whereas we're promised technology will just allow you to speak straight to, the president or straight to the prime minister. And it's like a million people shouting and no one's bothering to listen anymore. So in fact, part of the human questions around how do we reinvest in those mid-level structures of trust and transparency, which are going to be incredibly vital and rich and precious places where we know that we are known and we know that we are able to trust the people within that space, rather than it being mediated by a technology company who might be pressing a totally different agenda and we just don't know it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I think social media has done is expanded the category of friend to something that you are just biologically incapable of doing. Robin Dunbar, anthropologist at Oxford, who's famous for the Dunbar number.
Yeah.
Where humans on average really only have 150 people that you can manage to have intimate relationships where you know the other and they know you. And I think that the way in which early social networks found purchase was really like connecting to your Dunbar people, right? For the managerial class in the West by giving, you connected to Facebook by your EDU ideas. So the people you became adults with when you left home that are your friends, now you're staying connected and it moves along, but then you get friend requests. Do you want to tell them no? And then all of a sudden your feed is curated in this different way. And so just thinking about that and going, short of future evolution, which will happen a long time from now, you're still working with these limits. That can even change the way we relate to our social media. I would love the ability to purchase apps to change my algorithm. But most of them have ways that you can mark someone as a close friend, like on Instagram. and things like that. Because even the way you feel, like the existential psychological experience of using social media, if the feed actually brings to pictures of your friend who's in that 150s, new kid, or a cute picture with a dog, or hearing about their kids graduating, or whatever it is, that junk levels up your life, and our market fluidity of movement doesn't allow us to actually have all the neighbors in that number we would want. So that element can really change, but it doesn't even broadcast the ability for you to curate the connections that actually help you flourish.
Yeah.
And
I'm just noticing Cynthia in the chat talking about this is where unions could be helpful. And, historically, this is exactly what we have seen. It's just that in the past industrial revolution, in like this, in the 1800s and stuff, it took so long for those unions to coalesce and to gather together that actually the huge amounts of damage was already done. So we've got to make sure that we have those unions, chambers of commerce, churches, other places where people can gather together and be heard and be listened to and to hear from other voices, because those are so, so important politically. And I mean that like in the broadest sense of not just party politics, but the ways that we act communally together to protect the oppressed and to kind of move forward and together as people. So important that those mid-level structures exist. And unions are already seeing kind of, new people turn up going like, hey, I need protection and representation too. And that's going to be super, super interesting how that happens.
Mm-hmm. Earlier when you use the stealing fire imagery, that actually is one of the areas I'm kind of excited to explore, because AI is kind of it's having a cultural moment, but it's another iteration of human and technology's cyclical relationship.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're stealing fire from the gods. And then what did it do? We actually all of a sudden pre-digest things by cooking them. And now there's more energy. And that's where you start to see the development of a frontal cortex, the ability for symbolic language, for cooperation through communication as a species. And it eventually sets up having the social structure and the contemplative structure to facilitate something like the agricultural revolution, all that kind of stuff. And you did that bit on the relationship between technologies and religious transformations, that humans, we create technologies and then these technologies recreate us. And I think part of that history in the book.
Yeah, that's going to be a very, very interesting cycle, because, you saw what happened with those who did take on fire and take on then kind of agriculture and so on. And they kind of then get rid of the hunter gatherers who were not prepared to use that technology, and it wipes them out. Now I say to my daughter, hey, would you be prepared to have a little Elon Musk Neuralink implant where it would kind of connect to ChatGPT and you'd be able to know things like this? And she was like, my God, like no way would I ever have that.
It would need to be a different company with a different CEO.
Yeah, different company, whichever it is. And then you say, but what if you couldn't get a job unless you had one, because everyone else going for the jobs is already having that? It'd be like turning up for work now and saying, hey, I'm only using a typewriter. I'm not going to, I don't use laptops. So we have to kind of be much, much more carefully reflective about the boundaries of technologies that we're going to use. And the Amish, give them credit. They wear clothes, but they've made decisions. They don't use zips. They use buttons. They're still fastening clothes, but just in different ways. They've made decisions. Now you can say they made the decisions at where it's drawn the line in the wrong place, but at least they've made reflective decisions. And what AI is doing is pushing us very hard to say, okay, where are your decisions? What are you going to do? For me, I won't have the kind of smart Ring doorbell or the kind of, things in the house that listen to and you can ask questions. I don't want that. So that's one decision I've made, but there are going to be very, very serious decisions about implant technology that's going to blur those things, which are going to come really, really quite soon, I think.
Yeah. Well, and even using them in the generation of content, right? Like recently Sports Illustrated online magazine got busted that they have a editorial writer who is just AI.
Yeah.
And they figured it out in part because of the quality of the writing, but also when your AI algorithm hasn't been updated and there have been trades since then, and they don't know which team people play for. But then the pictures are these AI generated pictures and such. But that impetus you're naming, that you're asking your daughter, is a real important one. I've heard it. We've already gotten messages from clergy where they realize other clergy are using AI to do a lot of things that before got the personal touch. Writing sympathy letters.
Yeah.
And you just go through the list. Yeah, there's less clergy with more demands because of the financial situation. So do you use it? And if other people are using it and they're doing a better job at these other things, do you use the algorithms for all these kinds of stuff? And I mean, even like me switching to Substack, I paid someone to build a WordPress app way back in the day before Patreon, Substack, or any of this for the member community and such. And there are people just kept emailing me, can you just use one of these other ones? Which I kind of wish I'd sold it, before Patreon existed. But I put all this effort in and built it. But there are hundreds of people who are like, I would become a member, but I don't want to you have your own closed off walled thing. I want it with one of the apps I already use because then it gets delivered. So I had to switch, which means there'll be a 20% drop in the donations because so much of it goes to people that built something and it goes. So I didn't know at some point I'm like, well, I can't opt out of this. I got to use it and stuff. And there are tons of perks that come with it because it's built and the interaction's so much higher and it's going to make for fun. I got all these questions for us to talk about before here and I posted this morning. But the idea of opting out is we've made a world where not cooking your food with fire, not building a farm and then protecting it with a military and these kinds of things. When you look at our history with technology, the Luddite either needs a big friend or they go extinct. The nice guys get finished first, and the Luddites go out fast. And that's part of our evolutionary history and humans with technology.
And let me just be clear about the history of Luddism, because actually the term Luddite has become pejorative because it was used by the factory owners and the machine owners. And what those actual Luddites were doing, they weren't anti-machine, they were just pro-human. They were saying, look, there are really important crafts here that have been going back generations, and those people are just losing that high discretion work and being told, just be put in charge of a machine. They weren't anti-machine, they were pro-human, and that's the choices that we have now. This is why so much AI use is hidden. You see people they will not tell you. And that's why, at the beginning of the book, I put at the front of the book, I put an AI transparency statement to say where I used AI in the writing of the book. I'll tell you now, I didn't really, other than spell check and grammar and stuff. But it was because 5 years ago when I wrote Getting High, it was like, oh my God, it's amazing. Where'd you find the time to write a book? And now it's like, hey, where do you find the time to write a book? There's now a suspicion around generating content that you must be using it. And so, I think it's incredibly important. I know Laurie was putting that in the chat, that people are now having to be really upfront, where they're using it in creation, saying you can't use it for this, being really explicit. And, those are kind of key things that are happening because people are using tools, they're being hidden about it, but then they get exposed and problems occur.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, we've talked a bit about the relationship with technology, ethical questions. Now, what about AI and religion? What are the big questions that you're bringing in? And, if people are interested in it, we talked quite a bit about it in our previous conversation. But are there some live questions you're interested in how people from different religious traditions, different parts of the church, people that are outside of it thinking about tech and religion, what kinds of ones are you kind of bringing into this?
I mean, one of the stories I tell in the book, which I tell again quickly now, which is, one of the people who's been really pushing the AI research, is asked in this brilliant documentary, Transcendent Man, people ask me, does God exist? And I say, not yet. It's like, oh my God, so AI, if you look at the people who've been pushing the technology, they have been using explicitly religious language right from the get-go. This is not me projecting a theological reading onto AI. This is me seeing AI and reading people who are like, oh my God, they are using explicitly religious language there. And, other people are saying that there is probably going to be a war coming in the future where one of these companies is going to build a godlike AI, artificial general intelligence. And that is going to create such a moment of human resistance that it's almost going to be like this religious battle between those who want that kind of godlike structure to exist and those who don't. So the kind of ideas of human conflict and violence over these religious structures, I think we're going to see those coming again. And you look back through the history of where you saw those kind of wars of violence during the Renaissance, they are connected to these new technologies of intelligence that are coming through. If not, they just happen to happen at the same time. They are fully connected to that. Similarly, there's an incredible story about the birth of the atomic bomb linked to the birth of AI, which I tell in the book. But the guy who is he's in the film Oppenheimer, and he's standing there at that Trinity test. It's called Trinity. Oh my God, because, Robert Oppenheimer was a great reader of poetry. And there's a great story there about John Donne and how this technology was going to be this supreme act of divine violence that would purify us all and bring about world peace. Vannevar Bush, who's head of the US kind of military scientific effort during World War II, sees that test and that's not going to happen. So he writes a piece for Atlantic magazine saying, hey, look, we built this incredible thing. It's really powerful, but we really need to start thinking about technologies of peace. And he kind of imagines this machine that would be able to do that. And there's a guy who sits there who goes about creating that machine, which then becomes the kind of personal computer and AI. Now, what the atomic bomb did, we never fully used it after, these kind of incredibly horrendous events in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But what it did was it is such a powerful technology that it distorted relations between states. So you get the Cold War, which kind of pops up in Vietnam. It pops up in other places where you get these tiny proxy battles because people know that the big battle can never happen, but it distorts human relations. It distorts ideas of trust. AI is doing that already. The whole TikTok thing with the US and China and everything, the whole kind of technology scandal, and we've seen in the UK, could we use Chinese chips in our broadband? It's because there's that lack of trust. And it's very difficult to see where the transparency is. You can't look at a chipset and say, oh, it's sending data back to China. So it's not that it's doing it, but it's creating, places of mistrust that are going to function on those kind of religious levels in the way that we saw in the wars of religion back in the Renaissance and earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that came to mind when you were saying that, and earlier you had made the Babel reference. The app that tells you memories on all social media popped up a picture the other day of when you were in Los Angeles for an event with Walter Brueggemann.
Yeah,
and we were. It was afternoon, and you and Barry Taylor and Walter and then a bunch of our students are hanging out having wine, and you raised a question around the Tower of Babel. Yeah. And this question around technology. And I remember him going, they were building a tower and God confused their language, right? Because language is how they cooperate for gaining this coercive power. And the next tower that was being built was by Pharaoh. And God gives them some plagues and says, this isn't how we go. And he said, so the question of technology in scripture, right? And he had made a comment about Cain and Abel, right? And the technological transition between hunter-gatherers and agriculture and such. So the question, the question scripture raises to technology is you should just assume that the powerful are going to use it for perverse means the moment they get their hands on it. So go and do go and take that suspicion out. And I think that the thing about that is fascinating is a temptation for those of us in the West that are a part of the kind of dominant culture is technology is the thing we brag most about, right? This is true when you're hanging out in Edinburgh, in the UK, about the research stuff. It's true for Americans. What is it we organize our economy around is to win the technology and innovation battle because that secures our future.
Yeah.
And AI, we see both in the private sector, the investments, the fear and questions and trying to rally. What finally got Biden to sound like he cared about labor for policy was chips.
Yeah.
And What is the one thing everyone agrees on immigration in America? Getting the smart people. We want a talent drain from the rest of the world to come here to work in our companies. It's the religious questions in it, I think, are really important, because the ideology for those of us that grow up in a religious tradition that has somehow managed to take fidelity to the cross bearer to be fitting to the cross builder, the agenda of the cross builder. We have that struggle of Babel, of Cain and Abel, like, who is your brother's keeper? Thinking of the AI jobs outsourced in the global South, and who God takes sides, and it is not with the ones whose identity is being celebrated by the pyramids, but the ones who are building it. And so the kinds of ethical questions being raised, I feel like the prophetic traditions in the West give us a different hermeneutic, something I know that's shared broadly, but like that is like the primal commitment at the heart of radical theology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interesting, just today there was an open letter written by ex-employees and some current employees of some of these big tech companies. I just gave you a link to that, which is saying, like, hey, there are not good governance structures in place that allow us to say when bad things are happening within these companies. Like the ability to whistleblow is really, really important when you are dealing with a incredibly existentially risky technology. So, and they are saying, look, if we don't have those governance structures in place, then the profit motive will just simply take us down to a very bad place. And that's why it's just so important that people are able to speak up and share what is going on, which is what governments are trying to do. It's what the UK government managed to secure agreements on, and nobody has done it. Nobody has done it. The latest release of ChatGPT, they won't tell you how they tested it. They won't tell you what the guardrails are in place around it. They'll just kind of, go and trash Scarlett Johansson's voice and then go, oh, we didn't mean it seriously, So there's a lot of dodgy things going on there, and we need to be really careful about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the other question for me going into this is really like taking a step back and looking at the history of humans and technology, and then the way religion and state and economics gets reworked, right, as humans' relationship to technology comes about. Sometimes, and we've probably emphasized here more of the detrimental side of it, but the printing press and the emergence of nation states gave a logic of value in the other that gets expanded. And it's a bloody and ugly history, but eventually we got around to everyone getting to vote in the United States. And so, like, there are these positive sides that different kinds of technology of expanding the identity of people you have solidarity with. And when you think of kind of coming out of the 30 Years' War and early modernity, printing press, the Catholic dominance breaks down, so nation states and feudal lords connect with the emerging reformers, and you get what came for a long period of time a kind of stability, where ethical progress was made over time. And if you jump back further, you could look at like the axial age of sorts, where religious traditions reorient their form as opposed to just attending to the transcendent, but attending to the material reality of their neighbor. So one of the questions or possibilities that I'd love to feel better about by the end is that that there's a way that the increased connection beyond our nation states and the increased possibilities for connection, solidarity, cooperative action, and things might be able to have humans cooperate to address questions that our current structures don't have, right? So even when you gave the example of someone's go, I don't know how we do this, and then goes on to suggest things, under the suggestions are so connected to the protecting of rights, the redistributing of wealth, the kind of regulations that happen at the state level. But the problems that are on our horizon tend to be so far beyond the limits of any one state that we need a cooperation as a species. biological engineering. AI itself is one of these issues. Nukes, the environmental crisis. There are these kinds of things we face that our current ways of organizing and politically to act towards justice, that we don't have that infrastructure. And so one of the promises or things I'm interested in is what happens if there's a different kind of value structure being explored in these technologies to kind of generate, say, class solidarity that's transnational.
And those things are really possible, but they're about difficult choices we need to make. I mean, I saw a thing the other day, someone saying, I want AI to do my laundry and my dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I have to do the laundry and the dishes.
Yeah.
And these are choices that we're going to make. And in fact, the research that we do in the organization I work for has shown really, really clearly, as many others have, that when you bring in these technologies into the workplace and you engage workers in the process of that adoption, right from design, development, and deployment, people's job quality goes up, their engagement goes up, their jobs get better. They can give the crappy stuff to AI and they can do the more interesting, high discretion stuff. But it takes more work to engage people to do that. What we need is a kind of fiscal environment and a cultural environment where we are prepared to engage with people. And that takes good management practice. And the management practices come with the kind of, belief structures around what we think about people. The kind of interesting story about the industrial complex of slavery is that slavery didn't really end because people saw, slaves are getting treated so badly. It began to end when people said, hold on a second, if slaves can become Christian, then we can't treat them as non-human. And if we can't treat them as non-human, then we can't have these plantations open. So it's a way of reviewing the ways that people could believe that affected the labor practice, that affected the technology. So the kind of movement to end slavery comes out of, hold on a second, it's a different way of viewing people. Now, that is so important because it's the way that we come together and engage one another that's super, super important. AI can help us to do that. It can help us to become more empathetic because we're exposed to those wider stories. But it's going to be a narrow path to that good AI because they're bulldozing a very, very broad path through the way that big tech wants us to use these things. And that is much, much more complex. I mean, I'll give you another great example. We had a fantastic presentation from a lead researcher at a very large technology company who makes office products. And she said, they've done great research and it shows that somebody who's got a normal desk job, kind of working with a computer, AI could save them about 10 hours a month. All right. That's hours that you could say, all right, why don't you go and volunteer at your local charity shop? Why don't you go and pick the kids up from school? Why don't you go and do more exercise? Why don't you go and write a book? Why don't you pick up a hobby and a craft? Or we want 10 more hours from you. We want to extract more from you. We increase worker intensity. People's mental health gets more problematic. Those are management decisions about what we are going to do with the advantages of AI.
Yeah.
And we've got to be thinking carefully about how we're investing in management, how we're investing in our decision makers, how we're investing in the kind of ideas around who we are together. And we've got to come together as a kind of good polity to understand where those decisions lie.
Yeah. Well, Kester, I'm very excited about this.
So excited.
It's going to be a lot of fun. For those of you playing along in the process as we do this, if you have ideas and suggestions of different things to do, obviously like questions and input, but one of the things also, if y'all find articles or lecture videos or things that you're like, oh, share it, do it. I'm going to be, David, who helps all the stuff at Homebrewed, is going to be helping pull a bunch of these different resources and things people found helpful together on the resource page. I've been putting up some of the resources, books, articles, links to videos, maybe other people that do newsletters around AI and stuff that some of the guests coming on have shared. So that's there. But I say that, Kester, because I had someone already send me an idea for something. They said, I'm sure you've thought about this, but now could you guess what someone who knows both of us can think of a mutual friend that they were like, could you to talk with this person about movies that talk about AI?
I wonder if that could be the inimitable Dr. Higgins.
Yeah, they were like, look, what y'all are gonna do this? Can't you know people actually watch movies? If you told us you're gonna watch She,
let me just tell you again, like the reason I called the book, godlike history in myths, machines, and monsters, it's because in those mythical stories, in the movies, in the literature, in the plays that we write, that's where we begin to work out the problems that we've got with these things that aren't yet reality. That actually the book begins with a whole load of films like that I experienced as a kid, understanding that there were these kind of machines out there that C-3PO is on the one hand, this incredibly benevolent, kindly, mass intelligence that can speak a million different languages. Then a couple of years later, you got the film War Games, where AI is just a completely black box, malevolent force that wants to kill us all. And it flip-flops between those two things as we go through the movies. And it's, this is how we've begun to process the ideas before they've even become live. And that's why, my God, keep going to the movies, keep reading books. It's where all the good stuff has been composted already. Like, go and read Frankenstein. Mary Shelley has already dealt with so much of this. Dr. Faustus, so many other myths and great books, because they are where the stories are in our subconscious and our unconscious about how are we going to deal with these things as they become real.
Mm-hmm. I know. So I'm just saying, Gareth would be fun.
That would be great.
Or you get Barry to come over to your place since y'all are close. Basically, it just has to be a friend with a cool accent. They can't be an American. You don't want to talk about movies with an American. Like, what good's that?
Mm-hmm.
Gareth has a nice Irish accent.
A film.
Yeah. A film. Yeah. I'm just saying, but that would be another thing. Is if people have like films, like I already have seen TV show episodes pop up and stuff. Because I think that you're right that part of the way human beings raise the questions that they're most anxious about ends up being in the stories that sees us. Because our unconscious questions and fears can get raised in a narrative before we get transparent enough to formulate them directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so interesting.
All right, so we have to let Gareth and Barry know we volunteered them in front of a couple hundred people on the internet to talk with us about movies. I'm just like, but yeah. Anyway, so thank you all for joining. I'm sure Kester and I will be back on, maybe talk about movies or something else. And then at the end of the whole series, we'll try to organize different themes and things so people can share responses and questions, and then we'll do something like this. Who knows? It might have to get broken up depending on how many questions we get, considering my list has grown after just doing a few of the interviews. So I'm pretty pumped.
Great stuff. Thanks so much.
All right.